Julius Caesar. He was born into a declining noble family but rose to become the most powerful man in Rome. He conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and changed the Roman Republic into an empire. He was worshipped as a god, yet murdered by his closest friends. His name became synonymous with absolute power: Kaiser, Czar, Caesar. This is the story of Gaius Julius Caesar, a man whose ambition reshaped the ancient world, whose military genius remains unmatched, and whose assassination on the Ides of March became history's most famous political murder. Part 1. The Rise of an Ambitious Roman. Gaius Julius Caesar was born on July 12 or 13, 100 BCE, into a patrician family that claimed descent from the goddess Venus herself. The Julian family traced their lineage back to Iulus, son of Aeneas, the legendary Trojan hero who founded the Roman race. This divine ancestry would later prove useful for Caesar's propaganda, but in his youth, the family's noble blood did not translate into political power or wealth. Rome in the late 2nd century BCE was a republic in crisis. The old aristocratic order was being challenged by populist politicians called the populars, who championed the common people against the conservative Senate establishment known as the Optimates. Caesar's family aligned themselves with the populars, a choice that would define his entire political career. Caesar's Aunt Julia married Gaius Marius, one of Rome's greatest generals and the leader of the populars faction. Marius had reformed the Roman army, opening military service to the landless poor, and creating a professional army loyal to their generals rather than the state. This reform would eventually destroy the Republic, as generals used their armies to pursue political power. When Caesar was just 16, his father died suddenly. As the head of the family, young Caesar became responsible for his mother Aurelia and his sister. In 84 BCE, following family tradition and political alliance, he married Cornelia, the daughter of Cinna, a prominent populars leader and ally of Marius. But political fortune turned quickly in Rome. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, Marius's great rival and leader of the Optimates, won the civil war and became dictator of Rome in 82 BCE. Sulla initiated a reign of terror, proscribing, condemning to death thousands of his political enemies and confiscating their property. The young Caesar, as Marius's nephew and Cinna's son-in-law, was in grave danger. Sulla ordered Caesar to divorce Cornelia as a test of loyalty. Caesar refused, an act of defiance that demonstrated the iron will that would characterize his entire life. He went into hiding as Sulla's agents hunted him. Only through the intervention of influential friends and family members, including the Vestal Virgins, was Caesar's life spared. Sulla relented but reportedly warned. In this Caesar, there are many Mariuses. To escape Rome's dangerous political climate, Caesar joined the army and went east. He served with distinction in Asia Minor, winning the Civic Crown, Rome's highest military decoration, for saving a fellow soldier's life during the siege of Mytilene. He also served in Cilicia, gaining his first military experience and demonstrating personal courage in combat. When Sulla died in 78 BCE, Caesar returned to Rome and began his political career in the traditional manner, as a prosecutor in the law courts. He prosecuted several prominent figures for corruption and extortion, gaining fame for his oratory. Ancient sources describe Caesar as an exceptional speaker, second only to Cicero among Roman orators. His style was elegant, precise, and persuasive. In 75 BCE, while sailing to Rhodes to study rhetoric and philosophy, Caesar was captured by Cilician pirates who demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver. Caesar laughed and told them he was worth at least 50 talents. During his captivity, Caesar treated the pirates with aristocratic disdain, ordering them to be quiet when he wanted to sleep and making them listen to his speeches and poems. When they failed to appreciate his compositions, he called them illiterate barbarians and joked that he would crucify them all once he was free. After the ransom was paid and Caesar was released, he immediately raised a naval force, pursued the pirates, captured them, and had them crucified, though he mercifully had their throats cut first, in recognition of their relatively good treatment of him. This episode reveals much about Caesar's character, his supreme confidence, his ability to inspire loyalty and raise forces, his sense of humor even in danger, and his absolute determination to punish those who wronged him. Returning to Rome, Caesar began climbing the cursus honorum, the ladder of political offices that ambitious Romans pursued. He was elected military tribune, then quaestor in 69 BCE, serving in Spain. During this posting, he famously wept before a statue of Alexander the Great, lamenting that at the age when Alexander had conquered the known world, he had accomplished nothing. Caesar returned to Rome determined to make his mark. He was elected aedile in 65 BCE, responsible for public games and buildings. He spent lavishly, going deeply into debt, to provide spectacular entertainments that won him popular support. He was beginning to understand that in late Republican Rome, political success required both senatorial connections and popular support, and that the latter could be bought with bread and circuses. In 63 BCE, Caesar was elected Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, defeating two much more senior candidates. This was a stunning achievement for a man of only 37. The position gave him religious authority and an official residence in the Forum, placing him at the very heart of Roman public life. The same year saw the Catiline conspiracy, when the bankrupt aristocrat Catiline attempted to overthrow the Republic. When the conspiracy was exposed and the conspirators arrested, the Senate debated their fate. The consul Cicero and most senators demanded immediate execution. Caesar argued that Roman citizens had the right to trial, and that execution without trial would set a dangerous precedent. He was shouted down, and the conspirators were strangled in the Tullianum prison. Caesar's opposition to summary execution demonstrated both his political courage and his understanding of constitutional principles, though critics suggested he was simply protecting potential allies. Caesar was elected praetor in 62 BCE, then appointed governor of further Spain. There he conducted successful military campaigns against local tribes, earning both military glory and enough plunder to finally pay off his enormous debts. More importantly, he gained the loyalty of his soldiers through personal leadership and ensuring they shared in the spoils of victory. He was learning the crucial lesson that in Rome's new political reality, military command and loyal troops were the path to ultimate power. Part 2. The First Triumvirate and the Conquest of Gaul. Caesar returned from Spain in 60 BCE with two ambitions: to celebrate a triumph for his military victories and to run for consul, the highest office in Rome. Roman law required that generals seeking a triumph remain outside the city with their army until the ceremony, while candidates for consul had to register in person in Rome. The Senate, dominated by Caesar's enemies, refused to make an exception. Caesar chose power over glory and entered Rome to stand for consul, forfeiting his triumph. To secure election and protect himself from his enemies, Caesar formed a secret political alliance with two of Rome's most powerful men, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, Rome's most successful general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's richest man. This alliance, later called the First Triumvirate, was essentially a conspiracy to dominate the Republic. Pompey had returned from his eastern campaigns covering himself in glory, having defeated Mithridates and reorganized Rome's eastern provinces. But the Senate, fearing his power, had refused to ratify his eastern settlement or provide land for his veterans. Crassus, who had crushed the Spartacus slave revolt, sought political influence commensurate with his wealth. Caesar offered both men what they wanted. He would use his position as consul to pass legislation benefiting them, and in return, they would support his political career. Caesar was elected consul for 59 BCE, along with Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, an Optimate who opposed him at every turn. Caesar simply ignored constitutional niceties, using populist legislation and intimidation to achieve his goals. He passed land reform laws benefiting Pompey's veterans, ratified Pompey's eastern settlement, and secured a lucrative tax contract for Crassus's supporters. His methods were so aggressive that Bibulus withdrew from public life, leading wags to joke that Rome was ruled by the consulship of Julius and Caesar. To cement the alliance, Caesar gave his daughter Julia in marriage to Pompey, despite their 30-year age difference. By all accounts, the marriage was genuinely happy, and Julia became the emotional bond holding Caesar and Pompey together. For his proconsular command after his consulship, Caesar secured Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, and Illyricum, later adding Transalpine Gaul, southern France, when its governor suddenly died. This gave Caesar military command and immunity from prosecution. His enemies had threatened to prosecute him for his unconstitutional actions as consul. What happened next changed history. In 58 BCE, Caesar used the migration of the Helvetii tribe as a pretext to intervene in Gaul. Over the next 8 years, he would conquer all of Gaul, modern France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands, bringing millions of people under Roman rule. Caesar's Gallic campaigns demonstrated his military genius. He was a master of siege warfare, logistics, and rapid movement. He personally designed and supervised the construction of elaborate siege works, including the famous circumvallation at Alesia, where he built walls completely surrounding the besieged Gallic fortress, then built additional walls facing outward to defend against a relief army, trapping Vercingetorix's forces between two walls with his army in the middle. Caesar was also a brilliant propagandist. He wrote detailed commentaries on his campaigns, the Commentarii de Bello Gallico, which he sent back to Rome. Written in clear, elegant Latin in the third person, these commentaries portrayed Caesar as a heroic defender of Rome, civilizing barbarians and protecting Roman interests. They were read aloud in Rome, making Caesar's name famous and popular even as he was away from the city for nearly a decade. The campaigns were brutal. Ancient sources suggest that over 1 million Gauls were killed and 1 million more enslaved. When the Belgic tribes resisted, Caesar massacred entire populations. When German tribes crossed the Rhine, he built a bridge, a stunning engineering feat, marched his army across, ravaged German territory, then withdrew and destroyed the bridge, all to demonstrate Roman power and his own genius. In 55 and 54 BCE, Caesar led expeditions to Britain, the mysterious island at the edge of the known world. While militarily inconclusive, these expeditions enhanced his glory. No Roman general had ventured so far north before. Caesar was deliberately emulating and surpassing Alexander the Great, conquering new territories and bringing glory to Rome and himself. But the political situation in Rome was deteriorating. The triumvirate met at Lucca in 56 BCE to renew their alliance. Pompey and Crassus would serve as consuls in 55 BCE, then receive major provincial commands. This naked power-sharing outraged the Senate but demonstrated the triumvirate's dominance. However, the bonds holding the alliance together began to fray. In 54 BCE, Julia died in childbirth, removing the family connection between Caesar and Pompey. In 53 BCE, Crassus, seeking military glory to match Caesar and Pompey, led an army against the Parthian Empire. At Carrhae, the Parthians annihilated the Roman army and Crassus was killed. The triumvirate was reduced to two, and without Crassus as a balance, Caesar and Pompey were rivals. In 52 BCE, the Gallic tribes united under Vercingetorix in a massive rebellion against Roman rule. This was Caesar's greatest military challenge. Vercingetorix employed scorched earth tactics, avoiding pitched battles and attacking Caesar's supply lines. At Gergovia, Caesar suffered a rare defeat, but at Alesia, Caesar achieved his masterpiece. Through superior engineering and tactics, he starved out Vercingetorix's forces and defeated the massive Gallic relief army. Vercingetorix surrendered, and the Gallic rebellion was crushed. By 50 BCE, All Gaul was conquered. Caesar had made himself immensely wealthy from plunder, had battle-hardened legions fanatically loyal to him personally, and was the most famous man in Rome. But his proconsular command was ending, and his enemies in Rome, encouraged by Pompey, were preparing to prosecute him the moment he returned to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar offered to disband his army if Pompey did likewise. The Senate, dominated by his enemies, refused. They demanded Caesar disband his legions and return to Rome alone to face trial. Caesar knew this meant political destruction and possibly death. He faced an impossible choice: submit to his enemies or march on Rome and trigger civil war. Part 3. Crossing the Rubicon Civil War. The small Rubicon River marked the boundary between Cisalpine Gaul, where Caesar commanded legions legally, and Italy proper, where commanding an army was treason. On the night of January 10, 49 BCE, Caesar stood on its banks, weighing the greatest decision of his life. According to the ancient historian Suetonius, he hesitated, aware of the terrible consequences. Finally, he quoted a line from the Greek playwright Menander: "Alia iacta est, the die is cast," and led his 13th legion across the river. Rome was thrown into panic. Caesar's speed was devastating. With only one legion initially, he raced down the Italian peninsula, and city after city opened their gates without resistance. The Senate and Pompey, expecting Caesar to gather his legions before advancing, were caught completely unprepared. Pompey famously boasted he need only stamp his foot and legions would spring from Italian soil, but when Caesar called his bluff, no legions appeared. Pompey and most of the Senate fled Rome, eventually withdrawing to Greece, where Pompey could raise armies from Rome's eastern provinces. Caesar entered Rome without bloodshed, presenting himself as the defender of Roman rights against senatorial tyranny. Unlike Sulla and Marius before him, Caesar showed remarkable clemency. His keyword became clementia. He pardoned enemies who surrendered and confiscated no property. But first, Caesar had to secure his rear. Pompey's most competent generals commanded armies in Spain. In a brilliant campaign in 49 BCE, Caesar marched to Spain, outmaneuvered Pompey's forces and forced their surrender, again without major bloodshed. His famous boast captured his strategy: "I go to meet an army without a general. I shall return to meet a general without an army." Returning to Rome, Caesar had himself appointed dictator, an emergency magistracy permitted under Roman law during crises. He used his position to pass necessary legislation, held consular elections for 48 BCE, getting himself elected consul, then resigned the dictatorship after only 11 days. This constitutional punctiliousness was calculated to show he respected Roman traditions even while breaking them. In January 48 BCE, Caesar crossed the Adriatic to face Pompey. The campaign in Greece was difficult. Pompey commanded superior forces and controlled the seas. At Dyrrhachium, Pompey outmaneuvered Caesar, inflicting significant casualties and forcing Caesar to retreat. It was one of Caesar's worst defeats. Pompey's cautious advisors urged him to avoid battle and starve Caesar's smaller army, but Pompey's political allies demanded he crush Caesar quickly. The decisive battle came at Pharsalus in Thessaly on August 9, 48 BCE. Pompey commanded about 45,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Caesar had approximately 22,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. Pompey's plan was to use his cavalry superiority to sweep around Caesar's right flank and attack from behind. Caesar anticipated this and positioned a fourth line of cohorts specifically to counter the cavalry charge. The battle unfolded exactly as Caesar predicted. When Pompey's cavalry charged, Caesar's hidden fourth line rose and used their pila javelins as spears, thrusting at the faces of the cavalry. The cavalry broke and fled. Caesar's fourth line then attacked Pompey's exposed left flank. Simultaneously, Caesar committed his reserves. Pompey's army collapsed. Over 15,000 of Pompey's soldiers were killed or captured. Caesar lost only 200 men. Pompey fled to Egypt. seeking sanctuary from the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. But Ptolemy's advisors, hoping to curry favor with Caesar, murdered Pompey as he stepped ashore, beheading him and preserving his head in brine. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria days later, he was presented with Pompey's head and signet ring. According to ancient sources, Caesar wept, whether from genuine sorrow for his former son-in-law and colleague, or from anger at being deprived of showing clemency to his greatest rival. We cannot know. Caesar's arrival in Egypt plunged him into a dynastic dispute between Ptolemy XIII and his sister wife Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra, only 21 but already politically astute, had been expelled from Alexandria by her brother's advisors. The famous story tells that she had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence rolled in a carpet. However it happened, Cleopatra captivated the 52-year-old Caesar. Caesar sided with Cleopatra, triggering the Alexandrian War. Ptolemy's forces besieged Caesar in the palace district of Alexandria. At one point, Caesar had to swim for his life when his position was overrun, famously holding his military commentaries above water with one hand. Roman reinforcements arrived, and Caesar defeated Ptolemy's forces. Ptolemy drowned fleeing across the Nile. Caesar installed Cleopatra as Queen of Egypt. Caesar spent several months in Egypt, far longer than military necessity required, sailing up the Nile with Cleopatra. When he finally left, Cleopatra was pregnant with his child, a son she named Caesarion. Caesar left 3 legions in Egypt to ensure Cleopatra's security and Rome's interests. From Egypt, Caesar marched to Asia Minor to deal with Pharnaces, son of the great Mithridates who had taken advantage of the civil war to seize Roman territory. At Zela, Caesar annihilated Pharnaces' forces in a 5-day campaign. His report to the Senate on this victory was the famous 3 words, Veni Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. The laconic phrase captured both the speed of his victory and his supreme confidence. Returning to Rome in 47 BCE, Caesar faced serious problems. His lieutenant Mark Antony had governed Italy poorly in his absence. Worse, several of Caesar's legions were mutinous, demanding their discharge and promised rewards. When Caesar appeared before the rebellious soldiers, they shouted their demands. Caesar simply addressed them as quirites, citizens, rather than soldiers, implying their military service was ended. Shamed, the soldiers begged to be taken back. Caesar relented, demonstrating his psychological mastery of his troops. But the civil war was not finished. Pompey's sons and die-hard Republican senators had raised new armies in Africa and Spain. Caesar crossed to Africa in late 47 BCE with minimal forces, was initially stymied by the Republican forces under Metellus Scipio and King Juba of Numidia, but at Thapsus in 46 BCE achieved a crushing victory. The Republican leaders committed suicide rather than surrender. Cato the Younger, Caesar's most implacable enemy and the moral voice of the Republic, killed himself at Utica, denying Caesar the opportunity to show clemency and creating a martyr for the Republican cause. One final campaign remained. Pompey's sons had raised a substantial army in Spain. In 45 BCE at Munda, Caesar faced his hardest battle. The fighting was desperate, and at one point Caesar had to personally seize a shield and rally his troops to prevent their line from breaking. He later said he had fought many times for victory, but at Munda he fought for his life. Nevertheless, he won, and the last Republican army was destroyed. After nearly 2 decades of civil wars, Caesar stood unchallenged as master of Rome. He was 55 years old and had achieved what no Roman before him had managed: supreme, uncontested power over the entire Roman world. Part 4. Dictator Perpetuo, the Brief Reign. Caesar returned to Rome in October 45 BCE to celebrate 4 triumphs over Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa. Traditionally, triumphs were awarded only for victories over foreign enemies, but Caesar's victories had largely been over fellow Romans. He tactfully avoided celebrating a triumph specifically for the Civil War victories, but everyone knew the truth. The celebrations were magnificent beyond anything Rome had seen. Elaborate floats displayed the wealth of conquered territories. Vercingetorix, held prisoner for 6 years, was paraded through the streets, then ritually strangled in the Tullianum prison, the traditional fate of defeated enemy commanders. Cleopatra attended the celebrations, staying in Caesar's villa across the Tiber, causing scandal in conservative Roman society. Caesar used his absolute power to enact sweeping reforms. He was named Dictator Perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity, an unprecedented grant of power that made him effectively king in all but name. The Romans had expelled their last king in 509 BCE and had an almost pathological hatred of monarchy, but Caesar's position was monarchical in substance if not in title. His reforms were comprehensive and remarkably forward-thinking. He reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar with 365 days and a leap year every 4 years, a calendar so accurate that it remained in use until the Gregorian reforms of 1582 and the basis of the calendar we use today. The month of his birth, Quintilis, was renamed Julius, our July. He passed land reform legislation, settling his veterans in colonies throughout the empire, and reducing the number of Romans receiving free grain from 320,000 to 150,000 by providing alternative employment. He planned massive public works projects including draining the Pontine marshes, building a new library, and constructing a new forum. He reformed the Senate, expanding it from 600 to 900 members and including representatives from Gaul and other provinces, scandalous to Roman conservatives who saw the Senate as an exclusively Roman-Italian institution. He passed laws against luxury and in favor of debt relief. He reformed the law courts and revised the criminal code. Caesar planned an enormous military campaign against the Parthian Empire to avenge Crassus's defeat at Carrhae. Legions were already gathering, and Caesar was scheduled to depart in March 44 BCE for what would likely be a multi-year campaign. But Caesar's supreme power aroused resentment. He accepted extravagant honors, a golden chair in the Senate, the right to wear triumphal regalia permanently, his image on coins unprecedented for a living Roman, the title Pater Patriae, Father of the Fatherland, and a month named in his honor. His statue was placed among those of the ancient kings of Rome. Some honors, perhaps orchestrated by his enemies, implied divinity or monarchy. Most dangerous was the question of kingship. At the festival of Lupercalia in February 44 BCE, Mark Antony, then consul, publicly offered Caesar a royal diadem. Caesar refused it twice, to applause, but the gesture raised the terrifying question: would Caesar make himself king? Romans could accept dictatorship as a temporary emergency measure, but kingship was anathema. Conservative senators, horrified by Caesar's power and convinced he intended to destroy the republic permanently, formed a conspiracy to assassinate him. The conspiracy was led by Gaius Cassius Longinus, who had fought for Pompey but been pardoned by Caesar, and Marcus Junius Brutus, whom Caesar trusted deeply. Brutus's ancestor had expelled Rome's last king, and Brutus felt the weight of family tradition compelling him to kill the new tyrant. The conspirators chose the Ides of March, March 15, 44 BCE, when the Senate would meet in the theater of Pompey. They planned to strike there where Caesar's armed guards could not enter. The night before, Caesar attended a dinner party where, ironically, the conversation turned to the best kind of death. Caesar said the best death was one that was sudden and unexpected. That morning, Caesar's wife Calpurnia begged him not to go to the Senate. She had dreamed of his murder. Soothsayers warned him to beware the Ides of March. Caesar initially decided to postpone the meeting, but Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators and a man Caesar trusted, persuaded him to attend, arguing that the Senate was waiting to honor him. As Caesar entered the theater of Pompey, a senator handed him a note warning him of the conspiracy, but Caesar, surrounded by senators seeking his attention, never read it. When Caesar took his seat, The conspirators surrounded him on the pretext of presenting a petition. Suddenly, one grabbed Caesar's toga. It was the signal. Publius Casca struck first, stabbing Caesar in the neck. Caesar tried to fight back using his stylus, a writing instrument, as a weapon, but the conspirators pressed in, striking repeatedly. According to the physician's report, Caesar received 23 stab wounds. When Caesar saw Marcus Brutus among the assassins, he reportedly said Kappa Alpha letter 1F76 Sigma Upsilon, Tau Epsilon Kappa Nu Omicron Nu, Chi Su Technon, U2 child. In Greek, or according to other sources, et tu brute, in Latin. Caesar pulled his toga over his head, either to die with dignity or in devastation at Brutus's betrayal, and collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue. The greatest Roman of his age died on the floor of the Senate, bleeding from dozens of wounds, his blood pooling around Pompey's statue in bitter irony. The conspirators ran through Rome shouting liberty and freedom, expecting popular support. They received none. The Roman people, who had loved Caesar, were shocked and horrified. The conspirators had killed the tyrant but had no plan for what came next. In murdering Caesar, they had not saved the Republic, they had ensured its destruction. Part 5. Aftermath and the Birth of Empire. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant and co-consul, seized Caesar's papers and treasury. At Caesar's funeral, Antony delivered a brilliant oration that turned public opinion violently against the conspirators. He displayed Caesar's bloody toga and read Caesar's will, which left gardens to the Roman people and 3 gold pieces to every citizen. Riots erupted. The conspirators fled Rome. Caesar's will also revealed a surprise. He had posthumously adopted his great-nephew Gaius Octavius, thereafter known as Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, Octavian. The 18-year-old arrived in Rome to claim his inheritance, despite warnings that he would be killed. He proved to be as brilliant and ruthless as his adoptive father, but far more patient and calculating. A power struggle erupted between Antony and Octavian, complicated by the continued resistance of the assassins, who had raised armies in the east under Brutus and Cassius. Eventually, Octavian, Antony, and Caesar's former cavalry commander Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate, legally sanctioned, unlike Caesar's informal arrangement, and divided the Roman world among themselves. The triumvirs conducted proscriptions far bloodier than Sulla's, murdering thousands of political enemies and confiscating their property to fund their armies. The great orator Cicero, who had celebrated Caesar's assassination, was murdered, his head and hands displayed on the speaker's platform in the Forum, the same platform where he had delivered his greatest speeches. At Philippi in Macedonia in 42 BCE, Antony and Octavian defeated the armies of Brutus and Cassius in 2 battles. Both assassins committed suicide. Cassius killed himself after the first battle, mistakenly believing all was lost. Brutus survived the second battle, but, surrounded and without hope, took his own life. Before dying, he reportedly said, "Wretched virtue, you were but a name, yet I worshipped you as real, but now it seems you were but fortune's slave." The triumvirate eventually collapsed into civil war between Octavian and Antony. Antony had allied with Cleopatra, and together they controlled the eastern Mediterranean. Octavian controlled the west. At Actium in 31 BCE, Octavian's fleet defeated Antony and Cleopatra. They fled to Egypt, where both committed suicide in 30 BCE. Octavian had Caesarion, Caesar's son, with Cleopatra, murdered, eliminating any rival claim to Caesar's legacy. By 27 BCE, Octavian stood alone as master of Rome, just as Caesar had 15 years earlier. But Octavian learned from Caesar's fate. He carefully preserved the forms of the Republic while holding all real power. He refused the title of dictator or king. Instead, he accepted the title Augustus, the revered one, and called himself merely princeps, first citizen. He established the Roman Empire while pretending the Republic still existed. Augustus ruled for 41 years, bringing unprecedented peace and prosperity. He claimed to have found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. And he ensured that when he died, power passed smoothly to his successor, establishing a dynasty. The Republic was dead, replaced by empire, just as Caesar's enemies had feared. Part 6. Legacy: The Eternal Caesar. Julius Caesar's legacy shaped the next 2,000 years of history. Most immediately, he transformed Rome from a republic into an empire. The constitutional crisis that led to his dictatorship, the military power he concentrated in his own hands, and the precedent he set for one-man rule made the republic's restoration impossible. Every subsequent Roman emperor traced his authority back to Caesar. His adopted son Octavian took the name Caesar, establishing it as a title of power rather than merely a family name. Future emperors styled themselves as Caesar's heirs. When the Roman Empire split, rulers of both the Eastern Byzantine Empire and the Western European kingdoms claimed the Caesarian legacy. The title transformed into Kaiser in German and Tsar in Russian, lasting until the 20th century when Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated in 1918 and Tsar Nicholas II was murdered in the Russian Revolution. Caesar's military legacy was equally profound. His commentaries on the Gallic Wars remained standard military reading for centuries. Napoleon studied them intensely. Generals from medieval times through the modern era analyzed his campaigns. His engineering achievements, the rapid bridge building across the Rhine, the circumvallation at Alesia, the rapid field fortifications, demonstrated how engineering and logistics were as crucial as tactics. His conquest of Gaul brought millions of people into the Roman world, establishing the Roman culture, language, and law that became the foundation of modern France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland and Germany. The Romanization of Gaul was so thorough that Latin evolved into French, and Roman law became the basis of continental European legal systems. Caesar's calendar reform gave the world a rational, solar-based calendar. The Julian calendar, with minor modifications by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582, remains the global standard. Every time we note the date, we use Caesar's system. The month of July bears his name, a permanent memorial to his existence. As a writer, Caesar's commentaries established a new genre of military memoir: clear, direct, strategic analysis presented as objective narrative despite being carefully crafted propaganda. His prose style, with its famous clarity and economy of expression, influenced Latin literature and rhetoric. His lost works, including poems, a treatise on grammar, and his Anti-Cato pamphlet, were studied and discussed for centuries. But Caesar's most complex legacy was political. Was he a tyrant who destroyed the Roman Republic's freedoms, or a necessary reformer who brought order to a dysfunctional system? This question has never been resolved. To Dante, writing in the 14th century, Brutus and Cassius were the worst traitors in history, forever tormented in hell alongside Judas. To later Republicans, Caesar was the archetypal tyrant, and the assassins were heroes defending liberty. The American founding fathers studied Caesar intensely. They feared creating an American Caesar and designed the Constitution to prevent one man from concentrating too much power. Yet they also recognized that the Roman Republic's weaknesses, gridlock, corruption, and the inability to adapt, had made Caesar's rise possible. They sought to create a republic that was flexible enough to survive crises without requiring a dictator. Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, written in 1599, captured the ambiguity perfectly. Is Brutus an honorable man defending the Republic, or a deluded assassin? Is Caesar a dangerous tyrant, or a capable leader cut down by jealous mediocrities? Shakespeare leaves both possibilities open, and audiences have debated the question ever since. Modern historians have reassessed Caesar with more nuance. He was neither purely hero nor purely villain. He was extraordinarily talented, one of history's greatest generals, a skilled politician, an accomplished writer, and a capable administrator. He was also ruthlessly ambitious, willing to destroy the constitutional order to achieve supreme power, and responsible for the deaths of over 1 million people in his Gallic campaigns. Caesar operated in a system that was fundamentally broken. The Roman Republic was designed to govern a city-state, not a world empire. The Senate could not effectively manage far-flung provinces. Competition among aristocrats for military glory led to destructive civil wars. The common people had legitimate grievances that the Senate ignored. In this context, perhaps some form of one-man rule was inevitable. Yet Caesar's reforms, expanding the Senate to include provincials, settling veterans in colonies, reforming the calendar, improving the grain dole, planning infrastructure projects, addressed real problems. Had he lived, he might have created a more stable system. Instead, his assassination plunged Rome into another 13 years of civil war before Augustus finally established the Principate. Caesar's personal life reveals a complex man. He was married 3 times to Cornelia, whom he refused to divorce even at risk of death, to Pompeia, whom he divorced over scandal even though he admitted she was probably innocent. Caesar's wife must be above suspicion, and to Calpurnia, who remained his wife until his death. He had numerous affairs, including famously with Cleopatra and reportedly with Servilia, the mother of Marcus Brutus. He was prone to epileptic seizures, possibly experiencing them during crucial moments in campaigns. He was vain about his appearance, particularly his baldness, and wore his laurel wreath constantly, partly to hide his receding hairline. The Senate's grant allowing him to wear the wreath at all times was among his most appreciated honors. He was capable of great clemency, pardoning former enemies, refusing to take revenge on those who had fought against him, but also of ruthless brutality when he deemed it necessary. He could be charming and witty in conversation, a generous friend and patron, and absolutely loyal to those who served him well. He inspired extraordinary devotion in his soldiers, who would follow him anywhere and fight to the death for him. His relationship with Brutus, whom he may have believed to be his biological son, adds tragic depth to his assassination. Caesar promoted Brutus despite his having fought for Pompey, trusted him completely, and intended to make him a central figure in the government. That Brutus nevertheless joined the conspiracy and struck at Caesar suggests the depth of the constitutional crisis. Brutus loved Caesar but loved the Republic more, or thought he did. Caesar's death did not save the Republic. It ensured its destruction. The assassins had no plan beyond removing the tyrant. They naively believed that killing Caesar would restore the old order. Instead, it created a power vacuum that led to renewed civil war and ultimately to a more autocratic system under Augustus than Caesar had created. In the 2 millennia since his death, Julius Caesar has remained one of history's most famous figures. His name became synonymous with absolute power. His life story, the brilliant rise, the political genius, the military victories, the crossing of the Rubicon, the affair with Cleopatra, the brutal assassination, contains all the elements of grand tragedy. He was a man who reshaped the world according to his vision and ambition. He expanded Roman power across Western Europe, brought stability to a chaotic political system, reformed laws and institutions, and created the template for the Roman Empire that would dominate the Western world for the next 5 centuries. Yet he was also the man who destroyed the Roman Republic, concentrating power in his own hands and setting Rome on the path toward imperial autocracy. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph comes from the historian Plutarch, writing a century and a half after Caesar's death. Caesar's many successes could not secure him the title of the greatest of all commanders. Yet his natural genius was so versatile, so ready to find expedients in every field, that he seems to have been born to succeed in whatever he undertook. Julius Caesar was born into a declining aristocratic family and rose to become master of the known world. He conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and made himself dictator of Rome. He was worshipped as a god and murdered by his friends. And 2,000 years later his name still echoes through history, a byword for power, ambition, and the eternal tension between liberty and order, between the chaos of freedom and the stability of autocracy. From the streets of Rome to the battlefields of Gaul, from the banks of the Rubicon to the floor of the Senate, Julius Caesar lived a life that changed civilization forever. He was a military genius who conquered nations, a political revolutionary who destroyed a republic, a reformer who modernized government and law, and a man whose ambition led to his own violent death. His legacy shaped empires, inspired revolutionaries and tyrants alike, and gave us words and systems we still use today. This was Gaius Julius Caesar, soldier, statesman, dictator, and the man whose name became synonymous with absolute power. Sources and RFRNCS. This documentary script drew upon the following authoritative works: Goldsworthy, Adrian, Caesar, Life of a Colossus, Yale University Press, 2006, pages 30-89, 145-34, 287-356, 421-498, 537-621. Meyer, Christian, Caesar, A Biography, Basic Books, 1996, pages 67-142, 198-276, 334-412, 487-556. Gelser, Matthias, Caesar, Politician and Statesman, Harvard University Press, 1968, pages 2367, 112-189, 240-5321, 378-445. Freeman, Philip, Julius Caesar, Simon and Schuster, 2008, pages 45-98, 156-23, 287-354, 412-487. Strauss-Barry, The Death of Caesar, The Story of History's Most Famous Assassination, Simon and Schuster, 2015, pages 78-145, 201-267, 312-378. Holland, Tom, Rubicon, The Last Years of the Roman Republic, Doubleday, 2003, pages 89-167, 230-4312, 389-456. Dodge, Theodore Errold, Caesar, A History of the Art of War, Houghton Mifflin, 1892, pages 134-23, 312-398, 467-543, 612-689. Canfora, Luciano, Julius Caesar, The People's Dictator, Edinburgh University Press, 2007, pages 56-123, 180-9-256, 321-398, 456-521. Primary sources: Caesar's Commentari de Bello Gallico and Commentari de Bello Civili, Plutarch's Life of Caesar, Suetonius's The 12 Caesars, Appian Civil Wars, Dio Cassius's Roman History,